Greetings, Black family. Welcome to the annual Mutapa Biko commemorative lecture. And many of you would recall that in 1977, on the 12th of September, uMkhulu Bantu Biko was traveling to what is today known as Makhanda, a Hamano, Babu Peter Jones. And they were captured by the police there and transported to the Sanlam building, where he was tortured, And I am a man who does not believe in coincidences. That today we are gathered at uMhlabathii collective. It is a collective of photographers that I will tell you a little bit about shortly. And this building that uMhlabathii uses is right next to one of the biggest torture chambers in the country, which is known as the John Vorster Square. And these parallels, don't happen by coincidence. We find that the police that captured and tortured Biko for us to be gathered here to commemorate his memory are the same police who captured and tortured many other Africans, including throwing them out of, this high-rise tower of torture called John Vorster Square. And uMhlabathii graciously made this space available for Mutapa, and many of you know that Mutapa is, an initiative that started on the 25th of May, 2020, in the heart of what was called the lockdown. Sompisi and myself came together one day when we looked at the condition, particularly the deteriorating condition of Black people during the lockdown, the COVID-19 related lockdown. And there are two things that we decided to do. The first one was to do the Mutapa Dialogues, which was a lecture series that started on the 24th of May to mark African Liberation Day. As many of you know, that African Liberation Day, on the 24th of May, 1963, the Organization of African Unity was established by then the African leaders who decided that, the African independent states of the time, were still very much captured and under the clutches of colonial domination. And they wanted to find a new path, of extricating African states and Africans out of colonialism. Now, this is in 1963 when this realization, comes to bear. And many of you would know that or people like Babu Kwame Nkrumah suggested even this thing much earlier on, before 1963. So, and we felt that, given the purpose for which we are establishing Mutapa, it is important to link it to that mission of decolonizing the continent, And we wanted to find, the most dominated space in Blackness that we can contribute towards decoloniality. And it was the Black mind and the Black imagination, And we found that Mutapa is the instrument that we want to use to extricate the Black mind and the Black imagination from colonial domination. And it started then with the lecture then in 2020. The second thing that we did a meditative group, with brothers from across the country to try and help Black people cope and manage through the difficulties, of the prospects of losing your job, not having an income, not knowing, where your next meal is going to come from during that COVID period. And we shared a lot of insights about family, about, parenting, about the realities of being a black man, about how the black man and the black woman needs to coexist. So these are the two initiatives that we started at that time. So Mutapa, really, there are two main purposes. Was to create a platform for teaching authentic African history, because we realized that African history has got so many distortions, has got so many, colonial influences, and we wanted to find, firstly, sources that are truly authentic and African, and secondly, to share information that is truly, authentic without any distortions with Africans, and we started the lecture series. The second was, to build on something that uMkhulu Biko believed in so much. And maybe before I mention the second is that uKhamela also, you would recall, he said that the most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, and we wanted to, to borrow from Ubaba Ngugi wa Thiong'o, decolonize the mind through the Mutapa lecture series. And the second was really to contribute to something that uKhamela also believed in when he said that black people need to establish institutions that are reflective of both their reality and their aspirations, and Mutapa is exactly an institution that we want to build and grow to be an institution that black people can be proud of and know that it is a sanctuary for them, and it's not influenced by any coloniality. So these are the reasons why we established Mutapa and the relationship with, the work that we've done. To date, it was a startling statistic. We have done, and I mean, it's 4 years later now, we have done over 150 lectures. And it was insane, because many people see that there was a time we were doing, I think, 3 or 4 lectures a week, and now we are down to 1 a week, sometimes 2 a week, and this is over and above the other work that we do to write, to document history in a way that is also easily relatable and easily can be easily synthesized by Africans, and it's accessible even for children. We know that Mutapa, many of our followers are also young people and children. So it's really amazing how many lectures we've done to date, and this would have not been possible had it not been for critical partnerships that we've had over time. And one of those was a partnership with Arise Black Child, at the time led by uNdlondlo, may his soul rest in peace, Sandile Msibi. And that man played a critical role in shaping and contributing towards Mutapa, particularly in its formative years. And we are truly grateful for his contribution. And as we remember Biko today, I think we must also remember people like Sandile Msibi, uNdlondlo, and the many other people who perished, in the anti-colonial struggle. And these lectures have touched on, a cross-section of people, starting from within, Azania itself, where we traversed black people from different persuasions and disciplines who have contributed to our history and the aspiration of our liberation. And we have looked also at names that normally history would not remember, people like uMamu Boy, for example, who was a staunch Pan-Africanist, and a matriarch of note who fought tirelessly against the system. And we've excavated those names, names like Masabata Loate, many of you would recall the painful necklacing of that warrior. So this is the contribution that we've made to the historic body of knowledge in South Africa. But we've also spoken about uMhlabathii, Sobukwe, uBiko, and many other known names in South Africa. But the work of Mutapa has also stretched into the continent, where we have spoken about, Babu Samora Machel, Chivambo Mondlane, Patrice Lumumba, and as you know, the 12th of September is also this year marked the centenary, of Ubabu Amilcar Cabral. Had he been alive, he would have been 100 years on the day that uBiko transition was his birthday, the 12th of September. So these are many of the historical links that we've also made. And we have also even dedicated to people who have written extensively, such as Babu Frans Fanon, in terms of our history. But beyond the continent, we have also looked at, Black people across the globe who have made a meaningful role, whether it is Assata Shakur, who is now exiled in Cuba, for her role in the civil rights movement and also in the Black Panther movement. And we've looked at many other examples, both living and those who have transitioned, that have played a meaningful role in terms of our history. But more importantly, we've also looked at, the reality of Black people across the globe. And we've shed the spotlight about, Black people in Yemen, Black people in the East. We have looked at, the Indonesian government-led massacre, on the West Papuan people, So, and we've spoken extensively about the massacre in West Papua. We've shined the spotlight on the Congo, on Sudan, and our approach has always been to go to the source of the problems and not what we are made to believe is the problem, And I was very sad to see that, the geopolitical pendulum, for those who know the pendulum is always anchored somewhere because it moves from left to right, The geopolitical pendulum has for a long time been anchored on Western hegemony, led by the US and Europe. But the geopolitical pendulum is shifting towards the East, But nobody cares to pay attention that where it is centered, it's in the continent of Africa. And the continent of Africa is a spectator in the movement of the geopolitical pendulum. And, our role as Mutapa is to create that consciousness for us to say, whether China becomes the new, global hegemon, or the US remains the global hegemon, or, the biggest economy, whatever measure you want to use. What is the role and contribution of Africa to the world? At what point does the geopolitical pendulum not move left or right, but stay in the center, which is in the continent where it's supposed to be? So these are many of the things that we want to do as Mutapa. And I want to talk a little bit about this space. uMhlabathii is a collective of Black photographers that want to tell stories through the lens, and they want to tell, Black narratives through the Black voice and through the Black imagination. And after today's session, we'll have a walkabout of, uButsabelo Mlangeni's exhibition, and we'll tell you a little bit about some of the motivations for the work that is there and beautifully curated by our sister Kamogelo Walaza. And this collective, uMhlabathi, also comes from the land question, because they are, if you look at their logo as well, it's really about addressing the land question and the existential and black condition, or existential reality of black people and the black condition. So there are so many parallels between what we are doing today and what the space represents. And we would like to thank Babu Andrew Chabangu, for his leadership in that respect. I know I can speak forever, but today I'm not the one giving the lecture. So we have uSompisi, uGodide, uMphemba, izimzimela idlezinye, who's here to bless us, with the gift from our ancestors that he has, being a willing vessel for to share, so selflessly, uVeli Mbele Sompisi. But before we bring forward uVeli Mbele Sompisi, I would like to ask uDlangamandla, uDolo, Xhanti Nokwali, nationally acclaimed artist, who is deeply rooted in the essence of Untu, a man that, I hold very dearly and respect very highly, not purely because of his craft, but also because of the kind of person that he is, and he's going to mesmerize us with a tune, so that simchayelele kakuhle uSompisi. And today we are having this lecture physically. We've got many of the Mutapa supporters with us here today, but we also, would like to welcome those that are joining us online. City Kamaku Makwande. Sicela sim welcome with a warm round of applause. Utolo, Nobabu Ntunja, who's also going to join in. Siyabulela kakhulu. Kamaku.
Thatha magama amaninzi.
Hey.
Cash. Tomorrow cash.
I was moved to present this song.
Yeah, we're cash.
Shweme, going to be here.
Yeah, we're cash.
It's a new song, speaking
Okay.
I'm still listening now, still trying to decipher, the feeling and if I can but when you were speaking, it sort of
aligned.
I feel I had in place because and yeah, I'm reflecting on as a human being, as a black body today, and how hard, it is to surrender, just to live and to exist. And so, over the time, it sort of made me think, wow, definitely sitting you, because so hundreds of years ago, there's been an oppression of sorts, and I guess benefika ukuvuma okuthile ukuba kuze ukwazi ukujongana nemeko kufuneka uyamkele. Lolo lwamkelo ngenkosi yami sithetha ngokwamkela kule ngoma ukuba funeka sivume singaziphathi sithi hayi kulula ngoku akululanga akwabo mhlawumbi bacima kulula funeka bayazi uba akululanga itsho le ngoma camako.
Of course.
Hayi, ngicabanga kutolo. Uchile kwenye namhlanje. Divile la ndawo ethi amanxeba awaphiwanga amachiza. Yeah. Singabantu abamnyama siluntu sihamba sinamanxeba and asiphiwanga amachiza. Yeah. Sihamba sikhangela amachiza. Kodwa ke ndiyafuna nokutsho into yobana le uyenzileyo namhlanje ikwalichiza kwayona. Ikhona indawo efike kuyo yapholisa amanxeba amathile womoya. Yeah. No, masibulele sicela simqhwabeleni izandla utolo. Yeah. Divile no Bali Ntunja naye akashekanga ngemva. Manetsweba esondeza kula ndawo efuneka sibe kuyo. No, sibulele kakhulu. Sicama kusheka kulo ndawo. Sifike kuvuthondaba ke ngoku.
So fast.
Sifike kuvuthondaba as we hydrate.
Before, during, and after.
Yes, yeah. And we have to hydrate because our spirits are in drought. Yesterday we were at a music festival, and if you hear Sompisi talk about music, you would be amazed and think he doesn't have the same depth in talking about history, talking about politics, in talking about astronomy, talking about science, and he is a true depiction of, the forebears of the Kemetic order and civilizations, the Kush civilizations, the Mutapa civilizations, where the best way you can describe him using the languages that have got limitations such as English is that he's a multidisciplinary genius.
Polymath.
Yeah, he's a polymath. Yeah. So with those few words, ngicela nje simqhwabele uSompisi and welcome him to the front.
Bala inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala inamabala bala inamabala bala inamabala bala inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala inamabala bala ingwe inamabala bala inamabala bala inamabala bala oyithi namhlanje siyayibonga inkomo yamadlozi bo 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 thokozani lezi ngoma engizivumayo ingoma engazifundiswa ugogo noMahlubi uPungani Mkhulu yeah ugogo ke ozala ubaba isanusi Mhlubi elikhulu so uma senza lo msebenzi umuntu ofika qala kumina ugogo akufiki Biko akufiki uFenol akufiki uLumumba kufika ugogo qala ugogo so ngalondlela nje bengiqala mhlawumbe bengithi ngiqale ngibonge yena ugogo lezi zinto beshiwo umfowethu lapho uShweme uNtaba inyukwa imisebenzi kagogo noMahlubi bekakhuluma ngabe bekakhuluma ngemisebenzi kagogo noMahlubi I'm also deeply happy right behind all of you there is a Mutapa family every Sunday bawutolo nawencamani they put their children in front of the screen to drink from the Mutapa well every Sunday without fail. And when umfowethu uZila Mkhonto was saying Mutapa has also got families and children who follow them, it is scary because to mold umuntu, especially our children, is a very delicate and sacred thing. So when abazali, parents, decide to entrust you with their children, it's not a small thing because our children are our most precious gifts. But when we entrust them with abanye abantu to mold them, it says a lot also about the seriousness with which we take ourselves as Mutapa, because we ourselves are molders, you know, abantu who are behind this Mutapa, we are molders. We have got boys and girls we are raising. And the work we do is not separate from the boys and girls we are raising, you know. It is definitely related. So our work is not academic work. It's not intellectual work. We are not professors. We are not thinkers. All of those things, you know. Singabantu abalalela imiyalelo yabantu abadala. You know, that's what we try to do ngomsebenzi wethu. A lot of respect to you, Bautol. You know, disorganized, but in a beautiful way. Because yesterday, basically, about Bautol, and we were talking, Makabazel, about his work, you know. And I'm sitting here, but you're also sitting here, because umsebenzi wethu sonke uyathelelana. And I was discussing with him one of his gifts that he had for us. It's called Ezeyeza, right? So in one of those gifts, Ezeyeza, I was discussing with Bautolo. There's something he says in Ezeyeza that ubala lakho sisidanga sakho. Ubala lakho sisidanga sakho. And I was saying to Bautolo Izolo, black people have been made to wear izdanga ezininzi which are not theirs, and they show them off, you know. And Bautolo teaches there that ubala lakho sisidanga sakho. So when people go to graduation ceremonies of white people, bembeswa izidanga zamanye abantu, and they wear them proudly, but they don't wear their own proudly, you know. I suppose that's what he was trying to teach us. And bengithi kuye ke Bongani ukuthi I know people like these things amabhulu of saying a person is a musician, is an artist, because you need to belong somewhere, you know. Now abantu abathanda categorize or to classify things are people who want to control. Because once I can categorize you and classify you, it's easy to control you. Yes, so if I can't classify or categorize you, you are difficult to control. So white people created the world. Basically, all their systems are systems of control. All the organizations you see, and I don't mean organization, an institution, but I'm saying organization, the verb, the act of organizing is in the world, is part and parcel of the control mechanism that they use. Now, what they then also do to trick us is that they then attach a prestige to those categories, you know. And you see, Guma awards amaningi, especially with the artists, they brutalize our artists spiritually. But the best artist in this category. And the artist also believes they are the best artist in that category. Yeah, and then you define your whole life and existence as the best artist in that category. Because then they need, is dark. And then you have it on your wherever to display it. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that our respect and our love to Bautol, you know, and the work that he does to teach, to inspire, to elevate through umsebenzi wakhe, you know. And like many other people, few rather, he has chosen to be a vessel, yabantu abadala. I mean, if you have listened to many of his work, you can tell ukuthi abantu abadala are using him as a vessel, and he's an obedient spirit. And kumele sibacela abantu abadala ukuthi bamlondoloze, you know, they must look after him as one of our Asians, because we need him ukuthi asikhanyisele. Siyabonga. We had prepared a written text, you know, as is okhuluma from Yona, but we're not going to use it. But we will still have the conversation. So Shweme was explaining to you what today is about, the 29th. So part of the thinking was that it's a standard thing as Mutapa to remember many of these people. And we thought very deeply about this when ukuthi ukuvuselela abantu abawe empini is a difficult thing. Because even their families, Bautolo, don't have the courage to even mention their names. You know, their families of the people whose names we mentioned, their own families. And for some other reasons, there is they have collapsed within themselves just spiritually. They don't even want to mention those names. Also because, which is a painful thing, many of the families of our liberation heroes and sheroes did not really share their beliefs. It's one of the reasons why you find even families of the people we hold high don't mention them, because they pretended. I know families who pretend that they are with you just because you share, you know, a bloodline. They tolerate you, and many of them die lonely, you know. And the little work that we do, yourself and others, is the work that makes them labeko. Our work was not in vain. That's why this work is important, because Ntunja uMgcina is that many of them, umsebenzi wabo is actually being recognized when they are not here in the physical form. You know, if you look at the work that is being done now, you know, on many of them. And so we were then saying also that to do this is actually to also take up that war. That's why we were saying it's not academic or intellectual into Sienzai. And you were talking about the depression and the heaviness. So we decided, before I go into the theme, as Mutapa, to go and retrace the life of uMgcina Biko. So we did a tour, physical tour. So we started from, I write what I like, but still it doesn't really give you, because it's edited, an edited experience. So we went to his primary school. We went to see where he did primary school. The school is still there. We went to see the high school, Biko. We went to see the church that raised him, you know, but also the church that he used for the clandestine meetings. You know, you see some of the scenes that are accurate. Go, what's that movie? Cry Freedom. There is a scene where Biko meets people in a church. You know, we went to see that church. It is accurate. At least that part is one of the accurate parts. But then there's another thing that just blew us away. The clinic that uMgcina built in the 70s, just 10 kilometers outside King Williamstown, is Empilo. It's still standing, and it is still functioning. They built it in the 70s, functioning, and it's a proper building, proper structure. Sadly, the post-1994 state has not built a health facility in that area. They are using this one that was built in the 70s by Biko, Mapetla Mohapi, Mampela Rampela, the people who contributed to building it. It's still standing. Now my point is, this was built by somebody who did not have a university degree, let alone a medical degree, did not have a university degree, but he was able to get people to build a clinic that is helping people today. You know, ubala lakho sisidanga sakho. And I think Biko understood that there are things that are fundamental in us retrieving our dignity. And I think at an early age, that is one of the gifts he got from Abantu Abaphansi. There are these things you must open our people's eyes to that give us our dignity, but there are those also that are going to distract us. And I think he understood that at an early age. So for the purpose of our discussion, we said we are going to look at three interrelated things. We are going to look at Biko, Black unity, and the future of South Africa, in that order. So, as it relates to the first theme, uBiko, yabo, as I hydrate, uBiko, uXhamela, uTyopo, uNokwali was politically active for a period of not more than 10 years. Not more than 10 years. Many people don't think about it. Not more than 10 years. His active political life, not more than 10 years. In that period, he inspired first the establishment of a national liberation movement, SASO-BPC. He inspired the establishment of a national liberation movement. He inspired the development of what is called Black self-help programs. My own investigation suggests what is called the BCP, Black Community Programs, under a Black People's Convention, was inspired by what was done in the US by the Black Panther Party. Heavily inspired by that, you know. Welcome, Mkhulu, everyone. Inspired by the Black Panther Party, right? And they drew a lot from that. So when you read an interview that uXhamela does in 1973-72 with Gale, the American political scientist, he refers to the sources that inspired them, but he also then makes mention of the US, the Black Power movement in the US. So when you go and study the Black Panther Party's self-help programs, and what the Black People's Convention did, the Black community programs, you can see the influence there, you know. But where does that come from? Shweme touched a bit on that. It does not even come from the BCP or the Black Panther Party. It comes from Marcus Garvey, you know, because if you trace the history, the Black Panther Party was influenced by Malcolm X. Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites. Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement get influenced by the Black Panther Party. That's how you trace it to Garvey. Then, in addition to doing that, uBiko then produces and contributes also to the production of a collection of insightful political literature, let alone the 19 essays that are referred to as I Write What I Like. There is a glut of political literature that the Black People's Convention and SASO produced. So don't just look at I Write What I Like. There's other literature, some actually even more theoretically advanced than I Write What I Like. Things like Black Review, you know, Ujola would know those things. Black Review, which was a journal which they were running, and they were analyzing society and doing research papers, and then basihlanganise into what is called Black Review. And it is important for all of us to go and read those documents. One of the things you discover in those documents, for instance, in the 70s, the Black People's Convention was talking about the establishment of a Black Bank. You know, I know sometimes the media can make you suicidal sometimes, because the media has this thing of elevating things that get said by people who are trending now, and then the media says they are the first ones to say it. And because you want to be seen as relevant, you know. So distortions of history can also be made significant. But if we don't know that history, we will find ourselves following about and saying they are pioneers of things that have been there, you know. But even they, as the BPC, like I said, one of the most recent sources of that thing is Garvey. You know, Garvey is the one of, in the last, say, 100 years, if you go back 100 years, the person who has crystallized that, Garvey, he himself obviously was influenced. There are people like Paul Coffey, there are people like Booker T. Washington. One of the books that influenced Garvey is the book of Booker T. Washington. When Garvey was blown away by the fact that this man could build a school, you know, it's one of the things that he drew from. Dusi Muhammad, who Garvey met also when Garvey was at university in London, also influenced Garvey heavily, especially the aspect of the printing press, because Dusi Muhammad was writing for a publication, the Black Pharaohs, you know, so there are those influences. So uBiko does all of that in a period not exceeding 10 years. He's able to do that. But then if you look at the sum total of the contribution that the Black Consciousness Movement does under the leadership of Biko, they come in at a time when the two principal liberation movements, Zabanda Bamnyama, PAC and the ANC, are banned, and black people have been terrorized by the system to desist from political activity, and people talk about politics from under their beds, right? So when the Black Consciousness Movement comes in, Biko, and like any actor in history, you don't understand the significance of your actions at that time because you are acting within the moment. You are not studying history, you are making history. So you don't have time to analyze like we are doing. But one of the things that they did not know at the time, and they could not have known it, is that they were resuscitating a struggle that was essentially killed by white people, right? Because the Black Consciousness Movement inspires directly the 1976 uprising through, amongst others, the involvement of uMgcina, who gets expelled from Turfloop University, then gets a job as a teacher at Morris Isaacson. He then meets a Tsietsi Mashinini who used to call himself Donald, and the other one used to call himself Tiny, Hot, conscientizes them, attaches them back to their indigenous names. They then go around, reclaim their African identity. He plants the seed. The books he collected when he was a student at Turfloop, Tsietsi has got access to many of those books. That's why when you listen to Tsietsi's interviews, you can tell he could not have learned what he's saying there in classroom. The books that uMgcina supplied. Tsietsi also then becomes an actor in history. When they were stopped by the police in 1976, they were on their way to a hall in Orlando. They were going to meet. The plan was to go and meet there. All the schools of Soweto were going to meet when that moment erupted. So Amabulu disrupted that moment and the students were killed. So they were still going to go and meet when that moment erupted, right? So the point that one is making again is that when you talk 1976, right, you have to trace it back to Bantu Biko again. And he is asked in an interview when they do the trial and they're in court. Biko is asked in an interview, how would he explain the impact of Black consciousness? And Biko says Soweto. It just says that. He says Soweto. It's if you want to understand the impact of Black consciousness, he says Soweto. In court, he says Soweto, right? So he does that. Now this is a person, like I said, was active for a period not exceeding 10 years. Now, let's come to the second theme that deals with unity. Then we will conclude with the third one. Thokozani Mandabatala. Now, the Black Consciousness Movement and Steve Biko, right, the issue of unity is very principal in their thinking and their orientation. And you see, for instance, if you read some of their principal documents, one of them being the definition of Black consciousness, written or delivered rather, published in 1971, right? So in the definition of Black consciousness, there's a part where that document says, Black people, and I'm paraphrasing, coming together on the basis of their skin color and rallying together as a group. That's the exact phrasing, rallying together as a group on the basis of the source of their oppression, which is their skin color, rallying together as a group. Now that is in part and parcel of the theoretical framing of how they define Black consciousness, that it is not an intellectual nice to have, something for political lectures. It has to do with this group of people and their condition, that when you define it, it has to be linked. So it's not like some of these ideas that are like atoms that just float, right? It is an idea that is a product of a specific condition of a particular people, and that's why it's called Black consciousness, because there's a particular set of people whose condition gave birth to it. Then if you read further as well, in another essay, Biko talks about, in an interview actually, he would like to see, and I'm paraphrasing again, groups like the ANC, the PAC, and the BCM forming one liberation movement. And then he goes on to say, it is only when black people are so united and determined that they will achieve the greatest impact. He says that in an interview. And it does not become mysterious. He mentions the groups that must unite. You see, there's also this thing in which people must unite. You must be specific, because there are people who are black like me and you, but it does not mean they are going to be useful to our agenda. It's the reality. Because some of them have decided consciously to sell their souls to our enemies. So your mere blackness by way of skin color does not make you a person who's committed to the agenda. You still need to prove through evidence that the fact that ungutolo or ungusompisi or ungamani does not make you an asset to the cause of black liberation by itself. You need to demonstrate certain things physically, that we see evidence of which you are an asset to the black race. So you see those things, that how important and how central the whole concept here, and they use the word black solidarity, although Tina, for the conversation we use black unity, but they use the language of black consciousness movement at the time, it's mainly black solidarity. So it is very central in their thinking. Now the point that I'm making is that if black consciousness as defined by Biko Nosaso is meaningless if it does not have the element of black solidarity. It doesn't make sense if you look at that definition, because the issue of black solidarity is central. And this is why, even in that document, Biko and the black consciousness movement is very honest about the stereotypes that even exist amongst us as black people. In that document, they talk about the issue of my ethnicities and the colored question. In the document, there are these attitudes between the African components. They are confronting those things honestly in that document. But there's something that they then do when they define black, right? As those who are by law or tradition politically oppressed, socially degraded, and economically exploited. But they don't leave it there. They then go on to say who come together as a unit and work together towards their liberation. So they don't just simply describe a condition of oppression. They also say, having been defined as oppressed, the other requirement with definition of black is that you must also become part of those people who work towards their liberation. So it becomes central. Then Biko then makes another fundamental contribution on the concept or the question of unity. Shweme was talking, Shweme says when he was assassinated or murdered, 1977, right? So he was arrested, the last arrest was on the 18th of August, his last arrest. And it is important to understand that Biko is declared, and you must follow my language, that he is declared dead on the 12th does not mean he died on the 12th, because we get the information from the enemy, right? And I always say this to Shweme, there's something that, and there's a book I have in the car, The Tall Assassin, as part of trying to resolve this. Why was a decision taken to transport Biko from Sanlam to Pretoria, naked in a van, Land Rover? If you try to just work out the logic, why was that done that way? What was the idea? There's a suggestion in that book, The Tall Assassin, that there was some kind of I would say, a stampede. The guys at Sanlam, it seems, did not intend to kill him. At Sanlam, it seems the agenda was torture so as to get information. The book, Tall Assassin, suggests there are people who came from Pretoria with a specific agenda to come and kill him. In that book. And it is said the ones in Sanlam were not even aware they were coming. So I then link it and say, and it's not a valid theory. Him being taken to Pretoria, they had to present evidence that they had carried out the job. You know, or they had to control this, because if the news came out, also Pretoria, as the head office of white supremacy, had to control the narrative, you know. So some of us suspect that by the time he came to Pretoria, he was long dead. And remember this thing in terms of the medical process, you can die on the 12th, but there are people who can certify you dead on a different date by law. Because that process also determines whether there's going to be a need for post-mortem or people will have to be charged and what. So if people want to cover up, they can rehearse that whole process. That's the point I'm making. That process cannot be rehearsed. So they are then in a position to also decide what goes on the death certificate, because it's their pathologist who declared you dead. But if it's our pathologist who does it, we may come to different conclusions. Those are just some of the things. So, at the time he is captured, Babu Peter Jones, like Shweme was saying, they had met another component of the liberation movement, which I think is important, we must talk about, because we like to reduce them to three. They are not actually three. There's a component of the liberation movement in our country we must talk about, and it made an important contribution, the unity movement. Many of our organizations were actually influenced by some of the thinking of the unity movement. If you read their documents and you see some of the policy positions, Zabo Azapo, PAC and ANC, unity movement, uMgcina, by the way, is a product of the unity movement. I know when they write their histories, they doctor out other things. Before he joined what you know, he was a member of the unity movement. That's where he cut his political teeth. So clarity also when you listen to him and you look at, because those guys were very strong and grounded Marxists, and they were reading in the unity movement, one of their strengths. At the time he is murdered, that was the mission he was on. We also learn from some of the elders of the Black Consciousness movement that at the time uBiko was initiating this, there was a plan that was actually being made to get him to leave the country, Msheshapansi, ayohlangana noBabu O.R. Tambo, during that time. So he is killed and murdered when he was busy trying to fulfill this mission, unity. I'm just trying to illustrate how fundamental the question of unity was to uBiko. Then in 1976, 1st of December, uBiko finds out that the US Senator de Klerk is in the country. uBiko decides to write a letter. It appears in I Write What I Like. In that letter, uBiko calls on the US, he's in his 20s, calls on the US to say to them, people like Obabu Mandela, Babu Sobukwe, and their organizations, he calls all of them, must be released from jail, and they must be allowed to participate in the political processes that are going to shape the future of this country. He writes that letter on their behalf. He's in his 20s. He does not just do political leadership when he does that, he does international relations because he writes to a government in his 20s. You know, so he does all of those things in that period, like I said, in 10 years or so. Now, like I said, he gets killed while he's on a mission to try and get the liberation movements to work together, right? So, a couple of questions now, which I have in my notes is, the black political parties there exist, ziningi ke manje. You know, it's no longer just PAC, Azapo, there are many. The questions that now arise from those things is, do those organizations have a shared and common agenda for TIN? You know, it's questions I'm wondering. And if they have that agenda, what is that agenda? Right. The other question that arises also, if you were to stretch what Biko tried to do at the time, is a political agenda, yabantu abamnyama, or a black agenda. Does it depend on political movements only, right, for it to qualify to be a black agenda? So if it's not moved by political organizations, does it not qualify to be a political agenda? It's compulsory. Ukuze ibe a political agenda or a black agenda, it must be moved by ZAPO, PAC, ANC, or any other organization. Otherwise, anything outside it can't call for a black agenda. You know, those are some of the questions that I was thinking, we must grapple with those things. Somebody was even suggesting to me, actually, and is in the room, these organizations have actually become an obstacle to that agenda. So to look to them, you are just excellently engaged in an exercise of wasting your time, you know. So there are those types of things, which means that we must review and rethink that question, a black agenda, who must lead it? But the critical thing is that also, Tina, we think that agenda is important. Do we think it's somebody else's responsibility? Yeah, well, because my view is, once you outsource a responsibility, a task, or an agenda, you can't complain when those people abuse it. Yeah, well, because by merely outsourcing it, you are also creating possibilities for that thing could be misdirected and what. And it's one of the psychological things we must deal with as black people. We have a culture of outsourcing our destiny, and we would comfortable with complaining. Say excellent complaining. The last theme that deals with the future of South Africa, and I was thinking about this also belatedly. You must also listen to the language like country Nebt-Het. When people talk about the future of South Africa, it is also important that we make these distinctions. South Africa is a colonial construct, like we know, which came into being formally in 1909 as an act of the British Parliament, and then formally declared in 1910. Now, when South Africa was created, this colonial construct, Tina, we were not part of the discussion. We were not even a factor. So it was not created with us in mind. So it is not strange that South Africa does not work for black people. It makes sense why it should not work for black people, because this thing of purpose and function, and you want to use a car as a bicycle, and you complain that this bicycle does not perform like a car. What's wrong with this bicycle? Then somebody says, no, go and speak to the designer, uMgcina, who's the designer of the bicycle. And then when uMgcina explains to you, this thing was never meant to be a car, then you retreat mentally, you deal with your depression differently. Which is the same thing that we have here. But what's even worse, and this thing traumatizes me, we call ourselves proudly South Africans as black people. A decision that we were not part of, something that had nothing to do with us. In fact, the decision to create South Africa was meant to humiliate us. Amabulu were not doing it because they wanted us to live in dignity, have our land. It was meant to keep us there, to keep us there. But we say we are that thing. And especially when we fight with Africans from other parts of the continent, we defend this colonial thing. We are that thing. You come to South Africa and you come and do it. They can't come to South Africa, they are here. They are on the continent, they can't come to South Africa. Africans can't come to Africa. So you have those types of things then happening, and then Biko then, there's an interview, I will share it with you, where Biko then talks about South Africa. So one of the things he says in one of his essays, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, the liberals diagnosed the problem here in South Africa as apartheid, and the solution is non-racialism. And then he says black consciousness diagnoses the problem differently, white racism, and the solution is black solidarity as a counterforce, right? So this thing of diagnosing the problem correctly or incorrectly also defines what solutions you bring. But there's also a part where he goes on, where he again talks about South Africa, and this relates to where we are now. So I read Remember, I'm a product of colonial education proper. So I read a report here, World Bank, 2 years ago about inequality in South Africa. So that report here, World Bank says over 80% of the strategic financial assets in South Africa are in the hands of less than 10% of the population. It's about 2-3 years back. Biko says in the 70s, if the only thing that's going to happen in South Africa is that you have a few blacks that are going to be filtered into the bourgeoisie, and you have a few black faces in government, right? What is likely to happen is that our country is going to be run as of yesterday. And at the beginning there he says, and this is because whites have locked within themselves the majority of the country's wealth. But then to conclude that quote, he then says, if you have to change things here, you have to reorganize the whole economic system in this country. He says this in the 70s. Now note two things. He talks about whites having locked the majority of the wealth within themselves, and that if you don't organize or reorganize the country economically, the country would be governed, in his words, as of yesterday, right? The World Bank, more than 40 years later, a huge study, citations and what was, tells us something that Biko told us in the 70s. No economics degree, no nothing.
Before that.
Yes, before that. He shows us that. So if you read the World Bank report, you know, with our colonial education, and you look at what Biko said, if you are intellectually honest, the World Bank is telling you something you know. And it is, you can't also say it's a prediction, you know, but he was sort of like forecasting. And what you do is, and people like to say people are prophets, it's not so much prophecy, it's science. If you are able to, it's a scientific method, if you are able to bring variables together, just like you do if you cook, it's science also when you cook, by the way. Whatever you bring together is going to give you a particular outcome, right? You already have the theory, whether you're cooking something sophisticated. It's a science to it. It's the same with society. If you study about variables with society properly, you are able to develop what is called a thesis or hypothesis. And your thesis or hypothesis can be proven correct. It's not prophecy, it's science. Because you've studied concrete reality and you've made valid conclusions. So I'm to say this guy is a genius. So Biko then does all of those things. Then you find, as it comes to the question about where South Africa is, the point I've made already is about the economy. And the other point was, when you talk about the future of South Africa, Bautol, it does not necessarily mean you're talking about the future of black people. You must listen to the language. Because black people have been subsumed into this category that's called our people. Because white people are also our people in terms of the nomenclature, Yamanji. We have got different interests compared to other groups. So it must be clear, we are not our people. Because we have a specific reality that still is not properly resolved. So you can't have language that's amorphous, a formless. Because our people. How can they both be our people? Because their realities are not the same. So you must speak to everybody's reality in the proper language. And so one of the points we are making through this is that when people talk about the future of South Africa, we must not get seduced. They are not necessarily talking about the future of black people, you know. And this is important because through Biko, through Gavi, through others, we learn the importance of placing black people central in everything that we do. And that's why it is important to call them black people. We can decide later to change the term, but at least we decide what they should be called. It should not be something that's borrowed. But you would have noticed how the formulation black people is not used anymore. Because once you stop saying black people, one of the things you are erasing is the whole discussion on a black agenda. Because once these people don't exist in public imagination, the discussion about their agenda and their interests also gets killed. Yabo? Because our people exist. Black people don't exist, you know. And that is one of the important things when we look at what the future of East South Africa should be. Now, to conclude, I think uMhlabathii Biko and others before him imposes a number of obligations on us, and at least 3. So the first one is the question of, do we have a black agenda today, and whose responsibility is it to define that black agenda? You know, it's a question which I would love for us to talk about, not necessarily here. The second one is those of us, yourselves included, who think a black agenda is important, which is a question you must ask yourself. I can't ask that for you. What are you prepared to do to make sure that this thing that you say is important as a black agenda? What contribution are you prepared to make? Because it's not going to come through osmosis, you know, or prayer. It's not going to happen. We've tried prayer for how many years? Yeah, you know. And by prayer, I mean Christian prayer, because we have our own forms of prayer, which we have not tapped into. Yeah, the concept of prayer is not fundamentally wrong. It's just that the problem with us, we bow to the gods of other people.
Yes.
You know? So for me, that's really the fundamental things that Biko poses to us, and that we must question, you know, and that we must deal with, as it relates in particular to the future of this country. And the central question for me is, yes, Biko this, Biko that, 10 years, he did this. Today we are here. Do we have a black agenda, right? And if we don't have, whose problem is it that we don't have? Or, Shweme spoke about uMdlondlo. uMdlondlo used to talk about, are we the type of black people who think our only job, the reason why we exist, is to cuddle with whiteness? This thing of fighting to be included in the system. So there are black people who tell us when Makabazela, this whole thing about the liberation struggle is, there's no such thing. China, we are gone. There's a group of people who call themselves China, I don't know. You know, China, this thing is what? It's backward, you know. It's time to make money now, China. We must chow. There's usual. We must chow now, you know. It's our turn to eat. Michelle Arong, you know. Now that we are trapped in that dangerous mindset, you know, predator mindset, where even to meet you when Makabazel, I need to think whether there's financial value in having. Yeah, this is what's happening now. Yabo. Even Abantu who never had any serious money think in financial terms now. Yabo, it's transactional nje yonkinto. Yabo. Yeah, uhlangana nomuntu, ukuhlanganisa umuntu nomuntu, a normal thing to introduce a human being. A person checks, hey, this thing is gonna cost you, bro, you know? Yabo, no kuluma no munyu muntu nje manje abantu bamele bakhokhe. You know? And my worry with us and that type of thinking is that, let alone when it comes to matters of state, which is how you run a country and da-da-da. Yes, we must be concerned about. Here is my biggest anxiety, and which makes my intestines churn. Even the manner in which we have defined love, sex, relationships, and, you know, even my emotions, there's a $sign next to those things. You know, emotions, there's a $sign. There's a $sign next to it. And I even want to suggest the violence we see in the black families today. I want to tell you something that troubles me. For us black men, and we always have this conversation honestly, the official stats in this country, the black women who get killed, right, by human beings, not by other objects that are known, by human beings, in the majority of cases, they get killed by men, black men. But also, there is a phenomenon of black women's death which is called intimate partner violence. That's the leading cause of the deaths of black women in this country. So if you remove the flowery English, black men are killing black women at an alarming rate, right? And it has to do, I think, with the levels of emptiness that exists in the black community, that we are hollow inside, we are empty. And you find a person in a family who's supposed to be a man, but in society, this person is an empty shell. And you have all these expectations that this person must do this person must perform this, you know. And sadly, our young girls, and I'm glad Gogo Shweme is here because she's one of the few black women who's honest on this question. Abanya are just very treacherous and dishonest on it. These young girls don't raise themselves, right, to become what is called slave queens and what. There are older black women who normalize. I'm not saying black men don't prey on them. Yes, they play a part. But there are black women also who normalize that subculture. Older black women. And they don't want to take accountability for their contribution to a broader problem, which is not a black women and a black community problem. So there are black women who are enabling this predatory culture, relationships that are based on dollar signs. And we are increasingly finding, black sisters in the room, we are increasingly finding that it seems black women believe that it is acceptable, it is okay for the black woman to hold the black man accountable for his conduct, which I agree with. But it does not seem like black women think they also must accept that they must be held accountable by black men. You know, so black women believe they have a right, obligation to hold black men accountable, and the word they use is call them out, you know, as they should. I would rather be called out by a black woman than any other woman from any other group, because I'm a Gaviite. It's race first. I want to deal with my people first, and we do healing internally. But it also seems to me that are black women telling me that they would accept being called out by white men, but they are not prepared being called out by us. Whatever called out means, I'm just using their language, you know. But I'm making the point to show that unless we correct the type of conversations we are supposed to have, so that Koko Makabazeli, we are able to raise properly healthy, spiritually, mentally children. Because the way things are going now, we are going to raise children who are deeply imbalanced mentally and spiritually with the way that we are going. You know, because we live in two different universes as black women and black men, you know. So it does concern me the rate at which, not even the rate, just the mere fact that we as black men are killing black women at that, you know, whatever the reasons. But it is something that we must really, really look at and see what we can do to make sure that we reduce it and eventually that thing stops. There is a history to it, I accept, you know, but the fact that there's a history and there's a structure to it does not mean me and you are paralyzed. There are things we can do, there are things we can change. Because now we do have the power to influence social trends. There is a superstructure we live under, I accept, that predetermines where people live, whether people get jobs or not. But we are not completely helpless, it's not true. We are not completely helpless in that superstructure. There are certain habits as black men in our own and as black women we can change, which can lead to different behavior patterns. And we need to have those conversations with each other, not on Facebook. Yeah. We need to have those conversations with each other. And we must speak to each other critically, strongly, but we must speak from a place of love, black love. That whatever I say to you as a black man, even if it is not palatable, but you must not doubt that I'm saying it because I want to build you. Not because I want to go and brag tomorrow. Facebook. I dragged him, you know, because that type of energy also is what, you know. So I'm making these points, Black family, to say that learning from Biko and others, there's work that we need to do, you know. And I always make this point, which say, people like to talk, we must get our land back, we must build the economy. You can't get there if you can't deal with some of these basic things. You can't, because those things are related. How you are going to run a country comes from how you conduct yourself and how you run your family. Because it's the same person and you're building the same value. So you can't want to divorce those things. So kumele sizilungise lezi zinto, you know. I don't want to go further, you know. I don't want to go further.
Siyabulela Mbele. Sibulele kakhulu Godidi. Yeah. We'll take one or two questions from the floor.
You've asked questions pertaining to unity.
Yes.
But now I would just make a brief summary and try to touch on to other questions that we asked.
Yes.
As you listen, you would be able to assign a response to a particular question.
Yes.
Politics, by their invention, got nothing to do with black people's problems globally, politics. Because if we also research our own history of resistance and liberation, it did not start with politics. Aboyinto Makanda or Mbele were not involved in politics. So we have a solid foundation to debunk the notion that our solution starts and ends with politics. Now, we must also understand that coloniality is a prison complex. Just like when you go to prison, jail, prisoners own nothing. Prisoners. What they wear, what they eat, where they sleep, and on which bed that they sleep on. They don't own. But look at the behavior of prisoners. They fight and bully each other based on these things that they do not own. This is the behavior of black people in colonialism. What we see, the bully and the disrespect and the disregard that we get from political parties is the same behavior of prisoners in prison. Another issue is we need to be careful when we talk about a unity, black unity. Black unity should not be used as a blanket that covers all because we are black. Political organization, because there's also a question about the black agenda, which is, I think, now it's central to determine who do we forge together to form that unity. Because we also need to trace how these political parties came into being. I'm just citing this. If we were to talk about unity in the political sphere.
Sure.
But I don't hold the view. I used to hold it. Remember, knows. I thought that our liberation is going to come through politics. But I have come to a realization that if then politics were not designed for black people, they cannot be a tool or a vehicle towards the liberation of black people. Let's go back to basics. There is nothing wrong with what uMgcina did. There is nothing wrong with what uMbele, uMakanda, and all other greats uMshweshwe did. And therefore, on what basis are we saying that the political vehicle is number one compared to what they did, despite the great achievements? And one of those great achievements is the idea that one day we can confront the enemy and be victorious. To me, that seed cannot be cannot fall on rocks. You see, it has to fall on the land that is conducive to produce a fruit. I think that will be my contribution.
I'm firstly so grateful to be part of this conversation because in many conversations that I could say I like this, I've felt misaligned with the people I'm communicating with. My view is very interested in a pre-colonial existence as a model and an information hub on solutions of how to get there, how to get to being ourselves again and being free. So, and yes, so what I want to, I guess, discuss with the room is how can we, because when you think about, I think about the struggle in three phases. I think about it with uMgcina, Nomakoma, and then we've got Biko and Osobuko, and now we are here in this struggle. And what informed the struggle of uMakoma and uMgcina was their way of life. And their way of life started with their way of life in the family. And that kind of understanding and thinking bled out through if you are Xhosas, through the whole nation of Xhosas. And in all our nations, we what is held as a principle in the home is sort of general for the country.
Sure.
So I believe we lost that, and that is why we are now facing an identity challenge, because in the motion of being colonized, you know, we obviously lost I would say momentum, because it's a way of thought, it's a way of life. uMhlabathii is an ideology in itself, without being told by Karl Marx or whoever else analyzed lives, and you know, we were living this thing, and it was so how do we go back to that? How do we bring that back into the family, into something that's fundamental and not perhaps political, and just something that we can embody as a people again?
Of course.
What he's saying is partly answered by what Mkhulu has said about the three phases. That we were there, we came to this point, now we are here. But we are here also looking to the future. Sompisi, you mentioned something very important. This issue of prediction in science is not prophecy. For me, this is very important, because we are at a point whereby there's a spiritual, what you call it, a renaissance, right?
Yeah,
but the spiritual renaissance is also being captured by capital.
Yeah.
And other forces that are negative, that are not spiritually ours, they are alien to us. So as we forge towards a future, we know of our elders, I said I'll make it short. Our elders spoke about a cultural unity. People like Sheikh Anta Diop and many others. Even Babu Aikwe Ama, my favorite one. Even today, he's talking about a cultural unity. They come from Marxism, some of them. They actually studied Marxism. They were participated internationally. They called themselves scientific socialists for many years. But around the 2000s, even some of our elders, they shifted. They said, this way that we've been trying to organize ourselves has not worked for us. We did it from the 1940s in our 20s.
Yeah.
We are 50 now, we are 60. Some of us are 70, some of us are 80. We don't see the results of this thing being positive. So in a nutshell, I'm saying this, with the spiritual renaissance, we need to find ways to not document, but to create a pedagogy, to create our learning institutions. Mutapa is already it, but we need to actually sifake more fire in the engine to make Mutapa the thing that we spoke about at your birthday 2 years ago. In Mepetol, that we said we were going to do last year. It's hard to do. That's why we haven't done it properly. So I am saying that the university, the university, she's talking about the pluriversity. Africology, Mama Xhanti in Durban, she's talking Africology, and she's doing it. Yabonagalo, sebenza no Rasta, sebenza no Mphakathi, sebenza namakhosi. Here in Gauteng and throughout, there are people forging the same kind of.
Yes.
But look at it, all of them are doing it culturally and not politically. I'm not disqualifying the political part, I'm just saying these things have already started happening. What we need to do is find ways. Mas pasha, my last point. Mang pasha me is menzi maseko. Mang pasha, gipashela umenzi maseko, umndeni wakhe. But I make sure every day uma uthi mangiyapasha. That Mutapa must work. I mention things by name. Ukupahla is to declare these things by name and say ukuthi usibani osebenza uyahustlisha wenza. Let their thing work so that our thing works. So I just wanted to put that forward. Ukuthi let's connect spiritually. Masihlangana emgoqweni zobona sesiconnect because already ethongeni sihlangene makhosi.
Sompisi, ndicela siyilande kulandawo uTola isheku ubethelele from what uMgcina was saying, tracing to the Africa of antiquity to find the solutions for our future in our past. Yeah, and also to clear the clutter from the path of drawing from the inspiration of the Africa of antiquity towards the solutions of the future.
Yeah, those are difficult things you're saying. Very difficult. And I know because I live in my head a lot, Yabo, and grapple with this thing. So I run away from some of the things you're saying. So there's also another thing. I'll deal with those things differently. So one of the problems that we have, and I say this a lot to uZila Mkhonto, that part of the problem is how Europe has socialized our minds, right? So sometimes we inflate problems much bigger than they actually are. To the point that we sometimes even don't realize the progress we have made, And it is because part of the problem, Black family, that's why Mutapa, we've developed a framework, it's still nascent. We talk about something called cognitive sovereignty, right? So that you have all your mental faculties, they are controlled by you as you move through space and time. Cognitive sovereignty, yabo. But what cognitive sovereignty implies, Black family, is that you see the manner in which, whether you stay in Mkhukwini or in a suburb, right, you are still staying within the system of European domination because you are an element in that whole system, so that it's an ecosystem. So if you look at your general structure, your way of life, whether you have read Biko or Nkrumah or not is irrelevant. Your daily routine is predetermined by the superstructure within which you live. And that reinforces particular habits and by extension then enforces particularly patterns of behavior and then it normalizes them. Yeah. So the point that I'm making is that our entire way of life, our entire existence has been horribly falsified. So we are living in a horrible falsity. An example, we are using a calendar of our colonizers. Our very concept of time is colonized. Yeah. So I'm just trying to demonstrate to you that the extent to which, so we can't use the tools of this system to measure success or failure, which is what cognitive sovereignty tries to teach us, that we need to develop, and Biko calls it value system, right? We need to develop our own value system first for what constitutes progress, what constitutes success. And a point of departure has already been, we must first define our location. What is our location? Our concept of time. We must first correct that. You see, that's where our depression comes from. Our depression comes from, we want to, Shweme used the word extricate. We want to free ourselves from the systems of other people, but we continue to measure our progress by their systems. So we have that type of, it's a cognitive conundrum. A cognitive conundrum that we have. So our definitions of success, beauty, intelligence, progress, we must constantly work on redefining that. Now, we would be able to come to realize that the fact that we have the institutions he has mentioned, the fact that we have you doing what you're doing and what, that is massive progress. You know, massive progress. What we need to be talking about is how we can maximize what we have and make it more impactful. Because if there's clarity on what the agenda is, the size of the project is not going to be our focus. The focus would be on whether the projects are taking us towards the agenda. You see? So it's not stadiumology here. You see? We are not involved in stadiumology. You know? So I'm listening to ourselves, you know, and say, how can we do this? How can we do that? You know, we are doing a number of things, and we must acknowledge and realize that we have moved to this, having used that knowledge. And so I irritate people because I pay attention to concepts, because words are energy and they define your reality, right? So we must also be careful. I also had to deal with it. Even when we say pre-colonial, it's again the problem of the timeline. Whose timeline are we using? When we say pre, but I take the point you've made. I know what point you are making. You know, you are talking about us before they came. But now pre-colonial is their concept. You know, pre-colonial is not our point of departure, because we invented the measurement of time. The very measurement of time, we invented it. So we can't use their crutches for our movement. We need to develop our own crutches if we have to use crutches. You know, so there is this dismantling at a cognitive level that we have to constantly work at. Because the way you think determines how you behave. There's no magic to it. How you think determines how you behave, particularly what you think of yourself determines how you behave. And we must constantly work at that. So we've done, in my view, we've done much more than we realize. Probably is that we expect somebody else to say it, not us. You see, that's maybe a part of the problem. There's somebody we're waiting for, Zotiaz in the Sebenzile and what. It's not true. And here's the other thing. We don't have to die to be told what we are doing is good. Especially when we are singing Koshisani, also singing Shashayan, and want to brush each other's ego. Shweme knows that's why he was saying, I don't like my introductions, you know, because in the process, a person then becomes jabupule, you know, makes the thing very slippery. We should not be focusing on those things, you know. Acknowledge, yes, Shweme does good work, but we should not live in that thing, because what often happens, and he knows, some people feel umdelele if you did not speak about their degrees and their achievements at an event. We are not here to come and market ourselves and you must go and tell my CV if it exists. And those are, but it's part of the cognitive problems we must deal with. It is important for us to liberate ourselves from the intangible chains of our race enemies, because that's how they control us now. And we've internalized those chains because those chains comes with certificates and awards. And we put those awards up in our homes. So uMdlebe Ziyakhanya is not in the house, but uMdlebe Ziyakhanya is present, because I tell them, hey, usiso clean your endlini. I tell them, say make sure you clean up the certificate, those things. Hey,
They've replaced the picture of Jesus Christ on the wall.
Same concept. That's it. Now, then again, uMgcina said something very fundamental. And you know of this thing about the spiritual thing, right, and Renaissance. We know it is happening, Ngcamane, because some of us in our generation have deliberately decided to xhumana nabantu abadala. You see? It does not happen like into ezenzekalayo nje ukuthi some of us have made an effort ukuxhumana nabantu abadala. And abantu abadala are responding, they are reciprocating to that. So there's no magic to it again. It needs effort again. Ukuthi babone ukuthi akusinto yokudlala le, and we show the seriousness. So we must also understand it ukuthi in any way, this thing that uMgcina calls a spiritual renaissance, we are retrieving our own thing. You see, it's not something new or alien. It's our own thing. Ilona Bautolo, when you say, like you put it, the pre-colonial thing, and how do we do it? We spoke, Ngcamane, just before we started the session. It is important for us to understand where we stand in the hierarchy of world civilizations. It's very important. We must know who we are, right? So a lot of what is called developments and advancements in other parts of the world are things that we invented that have been stolen, modified. Today they are being weaponized against us. Now, it is also important for us to think that every civilization or technological advancement, and Bagit, technology is not gadgets. Technology is the method of producing goods and services. It's not gadgets. Technology is a method. It's the technique. So there's always been technology. There are people who think technology came with cell phones. There's always been technology. It's the technique, Now, every civilization is a product of a particular historical period, right? So the conversation that we should be entering into mhlawumbe Bautolo is, for the period we are in now, do we have to develop new or other tools of engagement with the world? Because we are not incapable, that's the point I'm making, we are not incapable of creating tools. So we must also not think if we are not able to retrieve, there is nothing we are able to create. It is not true. We constantly create. We just live in a world that continues to rob and steal from us every time we create. And sadly, we sometimes even steal from ourselves. And what do I mean by stealing from ourselves? We steal from ourselves in this way. We don't even give ourselves credit for the very same things we are doing. And expect abantu to come and say, no, sister, all I'm saying about Bautolo in a roundabout way is that we've done so much, but we are more than capable of doing much more. There's this tragedy, and I say this to my beautiful children all the time. One of the things that whiteness has done is to terrorize the black imagination into obscurity. You see this thing that a tortoise does. That is how the black imagination has been terrorized. You would say, whiteness just wants you to go this far. And the black imagination also behaves like that, But you say, how can this be the black imagination that gave birth to spirituality as a discipline? logic, mathematics, calculating the exact geographic center of the world. That is the stock that we come from. And we should not doubt ourselves. At the same time, we should also not, let's also not be, about our capacity to do things. Let's be honest about what we can and can't do. But the important thing, let's believe we can do.
Yeah.
Let's believe. So if we can't retrieve certain things, it's okay. We are still capable of creating others. And remember, they also stole this thing from us. I loved when you spoke about Marxism. So, because they like to create something from Europe. So if you study this thing, I know I did, because I was a Marxist at some stage in my life, So-called. So in Marxism comprises of 3 schools of thought or theoretical frameworks, right? German philosophy, British political economy, right? And the third component, German philosophy, British political economy, and what is called, what do they call this? Hegelianism, right? It's what really influenced it. It has got those, that's what Marxism draws from, what built Marxism, those things. But then there's the concept also of dialectics, right? There's a philosophy there called historical and dialectical materialism. Now, the Europeans, especially the Germans, who developed the philosophy of materialism, that is a part of Marxism, a big part of that philosophy is the method of dialectics, right? Which is society moves to higher levels of progress through contradiction of various forces in society, whatever those forces are. So, and that is why the concept is there is a dialectic relationship, which is interactive. There's a grinding or combustion. Sometimes we talk about the thermodynamics, if you use physics, thermodynamics, strength of materials, it's the same concept. Now, there's a method there called, so the Greeks, when they introduced it to what we know as modern day Europe, they introduced it as something called the dialego. And then it evolved into what is called dialectics. But Plato, where Plato is honest, right, where he's honest, if you read his honest word, he says they learned the method of the dialego from the ancient Egyptians. Because if you go and look at the mathematical history, the principle of dialectics applies throughout in it, the differential and the integral in mathematics. It's dialectics. So even when they present Marxism to us, you can't be in awe because they are bringing our thing to us, just dressed differently. But if we don't know, we will be in awe, and say Karl Marx was this thing. But we must tell our children about Plauotep, about Katie, about Imhotep. Who's Karl Marx? Yeah.
I might have to leave Uber for a minute.
Okay, sure, good.
But I need to say this, but just to
Yeah.
on the
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes back to the thing about too political or not too political.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sometimes in South Africa there's this difficulty in accepting the Kemetic or the Egyptian. Because we're always here, and all history is showing that Umuntu Kamuga Mzansi, and then Egypt is the daughter. We don't disagree. What I need to point out, that thing that you're talking about, there is something simple called the Dikenga. The Dikenga, some people know it. It's this circular structure which they call the Congo cosmograph. Yeah. Please, I tell you, as homework, as part of homework, we want to Dikenga. I want to summarize because it's a long history. I want to say it's a long history. The Congo is the heart. Yeah. Beautifully, Mutapa always deals with the Congo. Always brings it up. It's not what when a conflict is a Congo, the conflict is not an internal conflict. It's a conflict brought engineered from outside. But now the Congo now is going to the Congo is also going. The problem is with colonialism is that the Congolese are doing their thing in French. But if you read, there's a big Europeans that fought against this thing. From us, they are fighting it even until today. I've got 3 books. There's one called Black Athena Revisited, where they even use black scholars to disqualify this whole notion of Greek and Roman and others learned from us. But now the Egyptians learned from the Congo. The last part of it is this: how do they learn from the Congo? You want to comment? Couldn't figure that most people don't even understand. Even people who study deeply, they've been studying for years. They don't understand this thing. The other part is about Togology, but it's not Togology. There is a native by the name of Bess. Who Bess is this? There's a special name. It's Kipulute. Sometimes he wears some scarves around. If you look at Bess, who Bess is who Bess is what the Kemetic, the honest pharaohs, some of the pharaohs were dishonest, they were slaves, some of them. The black pharaohs, they say Bess traveled south, Bess came to Congo, and Bess was taken to Egypt. Now, this taken to Egypt, what they are describing, Mkhulu, but describe how civilization, it traveled they call the pygmies. Travel with knowledge, travel with the concept of wealth, health. So my homework is this: study Bess, study the cosmogram, and understand what it's talking about the river. Southern Africa. Bese kusufika lapho Congo, Uganda, bese branch off. This is all science, and it's all civilization. It's not mystically, it's something strange. But in every pharaoh's home, and in every nobleman's home in Kemet, they will call it a baby and a senya. And always is black. So that's very important. Don't get stuck in Kemet. Kemet is studying. It's important, it's us. But Congo is where we became that's where we became. Because I just wanted to.
Black family, I know that we can go on forever. And I think at this stage, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. And thank particularly Sompisi for the insights that he has shared, and for also activating our minds into these many other dimensions and areas of thought. And we hope that we'll what he likes saying to me, that we'll remain engaged. Because it is when we are disengaged that we are susceptible, to infiltration. So siyabulela kakhulu, sibulele Tolo, siyabulela umfowethu
magama maningi.
But your name is also particularly, very powerful. Bali, means that it's the source, it's the history. Because when we talk about our history, ngesintu sithi libali lethu. So siyabulela Ntunja. We are going to give you a chance to give us one last item before Sohlukane, but then we have prepared some refreshments. Sicela ningahambi ningaxhasanga kwenzela lingawe apha endleleni, ninikwe izinto zokutya ukuze nithengise uluntu olumnyama. Siyagqama kuhle. Over to Tolo.
basa kumbule balele na benguli abaya zila balele na benguli abasa kumbule balele na la benguli abaya zila. Khona ingoma afuna uyidlala lofuthi ngiyabona bakafuna isentla singayidlala. sitima emhlabeni Bali singamabali ingqondo zodwa sencane thina simbele sitima emhlabeni thina simbele sitima simbele amakhaya thina simbele sitima emhlabeni simbele sitima simbele amakhaya thina simbele sitima emhlabeni nomsingalo wambenu mama Mbele sizwe Mbele mhlaba Ngohlakalo isithathelo mama Eyake Mbele sizwe Mbele mhlaba Nomsingalo wambenu mama Mbele sizwe Mbele mhlaba Ngohlakalo isithathelo mama Mbele sizwe
Kutolo noDlamini umsebenzi omhle yeah yo hayi no aphele emqaleni ngoku siyabulela kodwa ndizawucela sonke Sompisi noNcamane Bongane Mamkhize asikaqedi bengicela ukuthi sisondeleni phambili sonke so we can take a group photo just to wrap up the day and then emveni koko ndizawucela ubana singene kwela cala sixhase and on our way out then we'll just do a quick walkabout of the exhibition. It's gonna take 5 minutes nje. Siyabulela kakhulu. Cela sisondeleni phambili. Cela sibaqhobele izandla uDlamini noNtolo.
Vuyisile wayama, Vuyisile mama, amangeba phela, awaphiwa ngamafuza. Vuyisile wayama, Vuyisiwe mebo, Vuyisile wayama. Vuyisile namaqeba, Vuyisile wayama, Vuyisile namaqeba, amanqeba waphila.